So yes, this is the final virtual event of the Space Week New York program for 2026. This is a virtual briefing and discussion of our recently completed needs assessment. This was an in-depth survey of the space companies operating in the state of New York to gather detailed insights into their strengths, their challenges, so we can identify the programs necessary in the future to help them grow, maximize their potential, but also make New York a more successful space state in the future. If folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat throughout. I'd be happy to answer them. So the genesis for this idea came from our partnership with NYCST, which is the New York Consortium for Space Technology. They are supported by the Department of Defense, focused on defense manufacturing redundancy and capability. So we wanted to get detailed answers on the challenges facing these companies. Workforce development issues. What skill sets are you struggling to hire for? Research and testing needs. What capabilities do you specifically need to be brought online to grow your operations? Funding and financing challenges. What sources are you struggling to tap into the most? So the full target pool was the 400 or so companies identified in the Empire Space Census. We used the NYCST affiliate members as kind of a focus group to test it out before we built it. It was a fairly extensive survey, over 75 questions. Responses were collected over a period of time, 2024 and 2025, focused on workforce development, research and testing needs, government relationships, financial health, and ecosystem connectivity. Final report was issued in January of 2026. So the general respondent pool, each of these sections we'll kind of go through. We'll have one graph or two graphs that kind of sum up the biggest takeaways from that section. We'll also have some kind of overarching thoughts and takeaways to kind of frame each subsection. But the overall respondents, we asked them to self-identify within three different categories, either core space, aerospace, or space and defense. Most were from the core space segment. There was also a healthy response from defense-affiliated companies. Other respondent attributes, they represented both small and large firms. They represented older firms and newer firms. They represented firms from across New York. So we got a snapshot from a nice cross-section of companies that are operating in New York. So the first section, U.S. government engagement needs. So the principal conclusion is there on the screen. Pretty much most space companies in New York do work with the government. They think there are opportunities for them to tap into. They're having trouble converting them. So then the solution sets become, how do we help New York-based space companies convert their interest in government contracts, government sources, government programs into reality? So the first one here is engagement type. There's a lot going on here. A range of different government interactions that we asked companies what they sought. The biggest takeaway from this graph isn't any one particular line. It's between the section on the left and the section on the right. The applied to versus awarded. Companies are applying to a lot more of these programs across the board than they're actually successfully converting into viable pathways. So it's understanding why firms are struggling to convert these opportunities. This could come down to a lot of internal capability and bandwidth with smaller firms. They simply don't have the ability to follow through on all the programs that they want to. Smaller firms also might struggle with some of the networking and kind of program building that they need. So this helps narrow down that question of how do we help companies get better access to government resources. And then an obstacles, and this is where companies tell us how they were struggling, which is the company's resource. They don't have the internal staff or infrastructure, or they feel, to be able to follow through. This could be they're applying and not being seen as valid or competitive enough. So we need to figure out how to expand their operations to make them more competitive in these opportunities. You see there, the second from the left is business maturity. Some of them are relatively new, and they might just not have the credibility. So it's finding ways to help them maybe build out their portfolio so they seem like more viable options. Next section, and again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as we go along. Happy to skip back later too if people want to. Second major area is financing and funding needs. Again, the government comes up as a major player here, as well as venture capital. These are the sources that companies want to tap into. But there are barriers to access. And now we're going to get a little bit more detailed about what those barriers are. Generally, most companies report difficulty accessing funding. This is not news, really. It just validates an existing conclusion. Companies need financial resources to grow. We just now have data to back up that conclusion. This is the graph that, again, taps into want versus conversion. So you see there, the orange bar is the highest priority funding, what companies see as their biggest source that they want to tap into the most. Again, government grants and awards are ranked the highest, followed closely by venture. You'll see there in the red bar, though, with difficulty to secure, again, it's government awards and contracts. So it feeds into that previous section that companies want to access opportunities with the federal government and are having difficulty in doing so. When it comes to research and testing needs, this was a big one because we knew that there are capability gaps in New York's ecosystem when it comes to testing. And so we wanted to get specific about what companies wanted brought online. There's significant challenges. There's significant demand across a broad spectrum. It's not like there's one singular capability that will unlock things for a huge section of space companies. It's more of a suite or a spectrum of capabilities, but there are efforts underway to fill some of those gaps. So you'll see here the limitations. Again, it's kind of across the board, but it's availability and accessibility, both of which feed into the proximity. A lot of these testing capabilities are just generally not located in the Northeast. A lot of them tend to be closer to major aerospace hubs in Florida, Texas, California, Colorado. That also increases the cost. If New York-based companies have to send their products out of state to be tested and then returned rather than doing them in state, that's significant cost in terms of transportation and cost in terms of time. That extends project deadlines and timetables. So having those capabilities in state reduces costs, reduces time impacts for companies and their products. We gave companies a very long list of capabilities that they were interested in having access to. They were interested in all of them, some more so than others. That you see the bolded ones there: vibration testing, thermal vacuum testing, shock testing, radio frequency testing. Those are the big ones, so to speak. And that's the beauty of this analysis. We developed this survey in conjunction with NYCST. They have already taken this data into consideration when bringing online new capabilities at their facility in Cornell. So the data is already being applied. It's not just theoretical or in a research state. This is becoming applied information that is directly serving to bring new capabilities online that will be available to New York space companies to identify the gaps that they had indicated were hindering their operations. So this is just kind of the first step. We will just keep iterating on capabilities that are needed, finding ways to improve access to them. When it comes to talent and staffing, a lot of takeaways here. We're going to get into some of the graphs. Upskilling was something that was a higher priority than I guess we had initially expected. That was kind of an interesting conclusion. And that's different than typical, high school and collegiate workforce development initiatives in terms of which pipeline you're trying to satisfy, how to reach those people, how to program for those people. So the upskilling component is one that has definitely grown in focus over the last year with some of our partners at Cornell and at the Intrepid Museum. Definitely a need for more, I guess, builder skills, production managers, testing, research and development technicians, things of that nature. Kind of regardless of where in the state or what type of industry folks are in, people need more people who have those hands-on skills to actually be able to grind mirrors for telescopes and assemble projects and products on an assembly line. Despite challenges, New York can sometimes get a bad rap. New York space community can sometimes be down on itself, like, nah, space never works here. New York is too expensive, all of that. Most of the companies we surveyed indicated either a neutral or job growth perspective, and they expected to grow in the future, which just kind of reflects a relatively strong existing fundamental position. If most companies are growing and report plan to grow in the future, that indicates that despite the challenges that we're aware of, there is still enough going on right now to foster growth. Imagine how much more growth we could foster if we actually harmonized everything we want to harmonize, bring new capabilities online, fill in all of these pipelines, fill these gaps. So that indicates a really good starting point. So this question on sourcing entry-level talent, this is particularly acute, just as an example here, on Long Island. Long Island is filled with a lot of legacy aerospace manufacturers and suppliers. They grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s around a lot of the primes, Grumman and everything like that. Even when those primes relocated out of state, the aerospace network stayed. They've been around for a while, a lot of family firms, things of that nature, but their workforce is beginning to age out. And so they need more people who are able to, enter, relatively, early in the pipeline there and build their way in. This kind of feeds into a broader conversation about a need to fully engage, I guess, the non-traditional 4-year program collegiate program pipelines. Those pipelines are still incredibly important, but there's also a need for certificate programs, associate degree programs, other kind of programs that are handled at community colleges and other organizations. So making sure that we're engaging the full spectrum of job training assets that exist throughout the state to make sure that we're filling some of these needs. This was the question on upskilling. Of the questions that kind of surprised or informed us the most, this is pretty high on that list. It was put in there kind of as a general question, just do you want to upskill your employees? It was very popular among respondents, a desire to continue to add on new skills for their employees. And this also fits into another initiative with NYCST on an eCornell virtual training module. There's a number of different ways that upskilling can be utilized. It can be valuable for existing companies with their existing employees to make them more skilled, more adept at carrying out their mission, more likely to stay where they are rather than relocate. It can also be valuable for people who aren't currently in the space industry but have a relevant job set. You're a welder, you're not an aerospace welder, but you know how to weld. And with, a 6 or 12 week, online program to know the lingo and the basics and how aerospace welding is different than, standard industry welding, you now might be able to get a job, a much needed job in aerospace field without having to go back and get, a new degree or anything like that. So the upskilling component and how we build out those programs has definitely risen in prominence over the last year. So this data kind of sparked that conversation. It fit into some building initiatives anyways, and will likely continue to be a significant focus moving forward. Difficult to hire for job requirements. I know the text is a little small on this one, but the tallest graphs right there, the ones that stick out, are technical training, project-specific talents and skills, and domain understanding and experience. This again feeds into indications of needs for people who can develop things, technicians, program managers, people of that background, that expertise, who are able to actually bring products to fruition, develop programs. You'll notice there all the way on the left, education level and degree type. No one's having any issue finding enough people with the right degrees. It's some of these project specific skills, these technical skills that companies report the most difficulty hiring for. This is another big one, similar but different than the question before. This is anticipated needs in the future. And again, the same pattern reveals itself. Greatest anticipated needs in production and manufacturing, testing, research development, as well as business development. So it's kind of building on that narrative that for workforce, people who are going to be able to actually build things is the gap that these companies are reporting the most when it comes to workforce. And then challenges, again, qualification and quantity. They don't have enough people applying with the skills that they need. We've seen that on some of the previous graphs. Cost of staffing is significant. Business costs kind of across the board have risen. That one was not surprising. It might be more difficult than others to kind of program solutions for, but it is one that we are trying to figure out how to best assist companies with some of those costs. And then you'll see there over on the right, the internal processes they're good with. Retention, most companies reported being able to retain their employees, which was nice. But again, this kind of reinforces more of companies need more of the potential applicants who have the skills that they need to actually build their products. This is the growth component. More than half of respondents had indicated that they had grown in the past year. The vast majority of the rest had indicated that there was at least no change. So this indicates a very exciting momentum. If companies are already growing in the existing ecosystem, again, it just feeds that belief that if we can be more comprehensive about it, if we can bring more resources to bear, if we can align the pipelines the right way, if we can bring new capabilities online, companies that are already growing will be able to grow even more in the future and really build out their operations here in New York. Scalability challenges. Again, this just reinforces that same narrative that when companies see issues scaling their operations in the future, it's technical and production. Those are the barriers that they see as the most significant to growing their operations in the future, which just reinforces kind of everything we've been talking about in this section. So now we're going to talk about ecosystem connectivity. And this refers more to how connected these companies are to other parts of the New York space ecosystem. So you'll see it here. We asked them how connected they were to 3 different groups. One was with the kind of the nonprofit, the civic sector groups, community organizations, museums, things like that. We asked them how frequently they partnered with academic groups and how frequently they connected with other space companies. In all of these categories, the most common response was never, or maybe once or twice a year. The responses for indicating any kind of frequent or regular or sustained connectivity were quite low. That's obviously something that needs to improve, because companies that are connected with partners are companies that are best positioned to grow. If you're connected with the academic community, that helps you build out your workforce. If you're connected with other companies, you could find new collaborators, new suppliers, new customers for your products. If you're connected to the nonprofit and kind of community space, that's where a lot of innovation and networking and brand awareness comes from. So we need to find ways, and this is one of the core missions of Empire Space, to help these companies network with each other, network with the academic pipeline, network with the broader space community, and find all the tools that they need to grow. And you see that here when you ask companies how satisfied they are with their connection. So even though they're not insanely connected to the rest of the New York space ecosystem, they acknowledge that that's not ideal. Most are either not satisfied or don't really have an opinion. Very few companies were satisfied with the level of connectivity that they have. So that indicates that companies want new connections. We just have to figure out the best way to make that happen. This was a particular question that we wanted to ask about how frequently companies engaged elected officials. Earlier segments indicated, the desire to access government contracts, government programs, having connectivity with elected officials helps companies understand, the best way to go about that. When is the right time to apply for certain grants? What is the best, format, XYZ? These are places where these companies can get important information that might help them overcome some of these barriers, but they're not reporting that they do it that frequently. Connectivity with all three levels, local, state, federal, is generally reported to be very low. So this is another area of engagement that we're looking to work on in the future. Optimism about New York space ecosystem, very high among respondents. Companies report that they, despite all the challenges, despite all the issues we just talked about with connectivity and access to funding and research needs and workforce needs, despite all of that, companies are growing, they're hiring new employees, and they are optimistic about the future. And that is absolutely indispensable, because you can't buy or manufacture optimism. It has to grow organically. That's the only way it exists. There's no funding stream. There's no specific, capability that you can, build with a set deadline that's going to grow optimism. So the fact that companies are already optimistic gives us a huge leg up moving forward, because that means they're already positive, they're already engaged, they're already thinking about the future in a way that's focused on, growth and connectivity and all the things that go along with that. So this was really heartening to see. So now we'll talk about some of the action pathways. Each of these sections provoked some thoughts from us at Empire Space on how we can tackle some of these challenges. So a number of targeted interventions across these domains, particularly when it comes to government relations, looking at some kind of clearinghouse to help companies, particularly startups and smaller firms, navigate the government contracting universe to see if we can't increase that conversion rate, help companies develop state, federal, local legislative outreach tools, so they're maximizing whatever insights and knowledge can be gained from engaging with their elected representatives, finding ways to engage the space community directly with the legislature in Albany Many other states have a space or aerospace day at the Capitol. They do it in Florida, they do it in Texas, they do it in Colorado, where the industry comes, meets with legislators, informs them about their work, their contributions. Legislators can go state level organizations and vehicles can be useful for the space industry. For financing and funding, that becomes focused on providing data of what's available to make sure that companies know of all the opportunities they can be taking advantage of. And then finding ways to network companies to state level resources on a government level that they're interested in, but also New York is home to New York City and Wall Street and all of the financial apparatus that operates here is hosted here. It's finding ways to better expose New York space companies to that network because it's not a proximity issue. It's finding the right way to have that conversation and letting those funders know that New York space companies are a viable market for them. When it comes to research and testing interventions, a lot of that work is happening with NYCST, identifying the key capabilities that need to be brought online, making sure that they are brought online, making sure that the companies operating in New York are aware of them, and then making sure that state level policymakers can become engaged in that process and finding ways to support that capacity build out as much as they can. For hiring and staffing interventions, this is already underway between Empire Space, partners at the Intrepid Museum, partners at Cornell, about finding ways to maximize, the SUNY system, the CUNY system. What existing programs might not be geared specifically towards space, but are space adjacent enough where they could be, refocused or retooled to serve that market as well. Databasing existing academic programs, job boards, something of that nature. Again, interventions and conversations with state level policymakers to make sure that they're doing everything on a state policy level to support workforce development initiatives. Ecosystem connectivity. This comes, a lot of it is just events, it's just repeating, making sure that there are enough events of a varied enough nature, virtual, in person across the state, relaxed, structured, all different subsectors to try to get companies out and engaged with each other, engaged with other parts of the ecosystem that can help them grow their operations. So that's the big data deep dive with our big takeaways. Looking to the future, we will run this survey again. We will probably do a business survey every couple of years, start to identify trends over time, and then focus on these action items, these follow-ons, figure out who our partners are, how we can bring these projects, these goals that the data have told us are necessary into reality. So we'll conduct future surveys. We'll conduct needs assessment surveys of other sectors. College programs. What are your barriers? What are your challenges? What are you seeing in your workforce? And things of that nature. So that is the end of our formal presentation on the data from the needs assessment. I want to apologize for the earlier technical difficulties. Hopefully people were able to follow along and get some insights from that. So now if there are any questions, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments. Turn it over to the floor to see what people think.
Hi, Patrick. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Was there any discussion about the historic moon, Artemis 2? I'm just curious. And how that relates to Space Week.
So it was actually really positive timing having Space Week right after Artemis. There actually are a number of New York-based firms that have connections to Artemis. There are suppliers actually located throughout the state who have contributed in various ways. Startups, established firms, some rocketry firms. Moog out in Western New York is an anchor employer out there. They participated in Artemis very heavily. There are also firms down in the city on the realm of, AI and communications that have participated with Artemis. So yeah, Artemis definitely, New York firms and New York-based organizations were key players in Artemis.
I'd be interested in learning more about the AI because as a just I'm a student now in AI, and I definitely want to get linked with companies um, who are doing AI space work. Uh, if someone could maybe message me in an email or something, just to give me some leads, that would be great because I'd love to do apprenticeship or internship with them at some point.
No, yeah, that's fantastic. I know that it's a growing field, but there are a handful of firms, and that's one of the things that New York is just really good at. We happen to be leaders in a lot of these different areas. Anyways, particularly in the city, it's an innovation hub. People come here to network and build new things, and space is no exception. And it crosses over into all of those other areas as well. So there are definitely some folks who are operating in New York doing space related. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat.
As far as like Long Island goes and linking to the local colleges there, I think if you connect with the student organizations there and then establish like a student network and then they can table it on their own campuses, that will be one way to start bridging that gap. Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know what happened. Man.
Pat, you're muted.
I don't think he heard you.
Is critically important. You hear me now?
Unmute myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I just want to thank you for the point about reaching out to student organizations. That is one of the key vehicles that we do want to utilize. Something that's already in the works. It's just about growing that network and making sure that everyone is kind of connected as they should be. Evan, do you have any thoughts on the needs assessment?
I thought you did a great job briefing it. I don't think I have any additional thoughts right now, but it was a really good presentation. Looks like Ivan has a question in the chat.
Yep. What are the repositories that can help companies with finding staff and the use of testing equipment? So that's a fantastic question. It actually has the two different components. One is finding staff. The other is finding testing. So for the second one, we published a report on testing capabilities offered by companies or organizations in New York. So we tried to figure out who was offering what and put it into one giant report. It was fairly extensive. That spreadsheet had 400 plus rows of different capabilities in it. So there's actually a lot, but like a lot of other things in New York space ecosystem, it's kind of disjointed. So that becomes, how do we put that information in an accessible format? Is it in a new table on our website or something like that? Whereas the first one, help companies finding staff, that is some form of a jobs board, which is a project that is actively in the works between Empire Space and other partners to identify the universe of who among New York space companies is hiring, who among New York space students or other workers is looking for work in the space ecosystem, and then connecting them to as expeditiously as possible. That platform is actively in development. We had development conversations about that this week.
I'm still in my
Annie, you're good.
I'm still in my first year of studies. I mean, I could probably wing it.
Hey,
No
Patrick.
worries.
Really appreciate the presentation. Kind of coming from an Army space operations background, I've met a lot of folks who are now working in the Air Force Reserve or kind of doing their own veterans own business thing and are very interested in both like the air and space community, especially in the city, especially since we look at certain areas like Fort Drum are very invested in missile defense, UAS, things that also kind of translate to certain problems as we have in space as well. So just offering that kind of as another avenue potentially, and happy to also connect you with some folks kind of in those fields. I guess one other question is like, have you folks seen from the governor or the state legislature, have you seen any kind of interest in prioritizing like the industry as we've seen across like Arizona, Alabama, and some of these other states? Or is right now this kind of the effort to kind of generate that demand signal to kind of catch like these folks' attention?
All right. Can anybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I don't know. My technology is haunted tonight. I have no idea what's going on. But thank you, Annie, very much. Those are actually two really good questions. So the first part on military connections, like the Air Force, one of the Air Force research labs operates up in Rome, the Griffith Institute. We've partnered with them. We've attended events with them. We had someone from Griffith Institute speak at Space Week New York last week. So they're a hub that operates upstate. There's a lot of defense-related suppliers that operate in the state. And then particularly you mentioned veterans. The Intrepid Museum has been really increasing their focus on aerospace and aerospace workforce development recently. And they have articulated to us a couple different times about veterans being a unique, pool of people who might be interested, easy to kind of transition into space-related fields in some of these critical areas. So that's definitely a pipeline that is actively under development. And the second component, engagement with Albany. If last week was Space Week New York, next week we are hoping to make some progress on that. Historically, meaning within the last 20 to 30 years, the level of involvement from state government and state level institutions was pretty minimal. Space and aerospace was not a key industry. There was no major legislation or legislative effort behind it. You would have some one-offs. People would honor an astronaut from their district or something like that. But recently, within the last 10 years, there's a member in the assembly. His name is Assemblymember Clyde Vannell. Represents Queens. He has introduced some legislation, to form a space task force to study the industry, looking at other kinds of incentives. And now the New York Aviation Caucus is starting to take an interest, which he is a co-chair of, in the space industry, particularly off of the success of Artemis II. So next week they're going to bring some folks, Empire Space, people from industry, to Albany to meet with them, to be able to discuss, the success that we've seen around the state, the potential here, the challenges that exist, how we can do that. So that'll be significant in terms of visibility and networking, because that is a key component. When we did our peer state analysis, that was an area where New York was probably the furthest behind some of our peers. Like in Colorado, the Colorado Space Coalition is chaired by the Lieutenant Governor of Colorado. Like they are plugged in. It is a key policy priority for these states, and we don't. Space is probably never going to be a top 5 industry for the New York State economic development analysis, at least in the immediate near term. But having it as a focus area, we've had some great conversations with folks from Empire State Development in the last year or so. So that apparatus might not be the fastest moving on planet Earth, but we are starting to see it kind of realize that there's some interesting stuff going on, that there's a lot happening around the state. A lot of these companies are their constituents or employ their constituents. So we are starting to get some traction from both elected and kind of policy focus entities in state government, which has been very rewarding. So thank you. Those were fantastic questions. Let me see. Do we have anything else in the chat? All right. I know we got started late and technical delays. Question in the chat from Ivan: have we invited politicians? They're part of our general invite. I think someone connected to one of the offices. When I went through the RSVPs for some of these events, there were a couple of legislative offices who had RSVP'd. I'm not entirely sure if they attended. I have to go back and check, but they were at least on the RSVP list for I think at least one state senator's office, and I think at least one state assembly member's office. So they generally are invited to these things. Maybe after we're able to meet and engage with them much more directly next week, we'll see more significant engagement in the future. We've had some one-on-one conversations as well. State Senator James Skoufis from the Hudson Valley had an observatory in his district he was curious about. We did some research and made some connections for him. We've worked with Assemblymember Vanel's office for a while. Assemblymember Donna Lupardo, who's the former co-chair of the Aviation Caucus, and a dedicated Trekkie, has also, engaged with us in the past, kind of helping us to understand state government and how it works. So it's been kind of one-offs. It's starting to get a little bit more comprehensive, and hopefully we can find ways to engage them more fully in Space Week New York 2027. Everyone's invited to the party. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Again, if anyone is interested in the full report, please just email me. If you want the question by question breakdown with, all of the graphs, the full analysis, it's a lengthy read, but it really is insightful in terms of what's going on. So again, it's just patrick@empirespace.org. Feel free to ping me an email and we can send you over the compressed PDF. Annie, do you have a final question before we go?
Yeah, kind of a comment. Appreciate you answering last two. I'm pretty involved in like the NY. I go to New York Law School, and then pretty involved with NYU's like Tandon School of Engineering. And I think there's a lot of interest in the space industry, but right now, at least, a lot of the students are very focused at like the international level. And I think that there's potential like to kind of have students kind of build some research capacity, if that's something we're also looking for, to kind of work through not only needs assessment, but whether it's a policy brief or something else as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of interest from a lot of younger students and emerging professionals, but maybe because we're right next to the UN or something like that, I think a lot of those efforts are kind of directed towards the international stage instead, since I don't know if folks are as aware like of kind of what's going on like statewide or locally.
Yeah, so that actually brings up a couple of interesting dimensions. So one is New York is obviously probably the most international city in the U.S., with the exception perhaps of Washington, D.C., which obviously has its other own priority focus areas. So we have partnered. One of our longest standing partners at Empire Space is the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office, because Luxembourg is very plugged into the satellite industry. They have a very active office in New York, engaging, New York-based firms. So we've been partners with them for a while. We've had interested conversations with other international, space-related either countries or companies, because New York is a hub. So if any of these international companies do wind up operating in the state, sometimes New York is a key area. Even if they don't have an office here, they're usually in the city at some point for a meeting, a conference, XYZ. So it always has that center of gravity. But the flip side of that is, and we ran another jobs posting analysis recently, and this is just a reality of the industry, a significant number of space and aerospace related jobs have some level of security restriction, depending on how close they get to ITAR or any of those other related firms. So if there are citizenship restrictions, that becomes endemic. It's not insurmountable. It's figuring out what are the best pathways for someone who may be an international student who, may not be able to get into the defense pipeline, but there are other pipelines that would be very open to those research avenues and figuring out, what those connections are. So it's not prohibitive. It's just something we need to be knowledgeable of, so we can make sure that we're maximizing those connections. New York is an international city. So finding ways to maximize, the interest from that community in the New York space ecosystem is a unique role that we're really the only state that can kind of play that role in both the American and global space ecosystems, just because of the nature of New York being one of the top 3 global cities on the planet. That's an asset that you can't create despite how much you try. Like it's a very unique capability that really only New York can tap into.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, even among like my own research that I do and a lot of other students I know, like we're all focused mainly on like international governance. Most of us are like US citizens, or potentially, I guess, would be the first step, be eligible for clearance. But like a lot of the focus is on like international governance, space diplomacy, international like supply chain. And so I'm not sure, like kind of pushing more so that there are like state and local opportunities maybe for research or like investment and involvement for those folks is like also quite exciting, and maybe a little bit closer to home, I guess, than thinking about what the UN's doing and whether we're making a new UN, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that like I guess I've seen a lot of folks come through who are very interested in space, but then mainly are stuck kind of at the international stage, doing like research, and aren't really familiar like with the landscape, even in the US or potentially like where we're living.
And we had some really interesting policy and governance conversations at Space Week last year at the Intrepid Museum. We had a panel with governance experts. One of the speakers actually was from NYU, Delane Mayer, who works on space government. Are you familiar with her?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So, and that's you tap into another thing that New York can do, is that kind of convening place for those broader policy conversations. One of the groups that we love engaging with, it's called the Lunar Development Cooperative. Kind of focused on some of those. How do we build the legal architecture for actual like settlements and commercial operations on the moon without with trying to find ways to mitigate conflicts and XYZ. And New York is really well positioned to have a role in working through some of those detailed kind of policy questions, because we have that kind of global hub center of gravity, but we're also a place where people come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different fields. And it's when you have that mixing and kind of cross exposure is when you can get into some really interesting solutions to some of these problems. So again, thank you very much for the question. All right. Unless there's any final hands, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us tonight. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties. We found a way here in the end. I want to thank everyone for the great questions at the end. This is only the first of many conversations about the needs assessment and the insights it offers us. So yeah, please stay in touch as always. Email if you have any questions or want to access the full report. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, everyone who joined the call and helped make Space New York 2026 an absolutely fantastic program. So we appreciate you and enjoy the rest of your evening.